That is good.
Morning. How are you? So I'll be driving. I'm down on Hastings, so I'll be driving, but I can listen still.
You look great.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'm just happy you're here.
I
And I'm
I
excited.
hope you're not driving right now, are you? Are you parked somewhere?
Yeah, yeah. I'm parked at Money Mart waiting for her to cash her check. So when I start driving, I just put the phone in. It goes onto my speakers anyway, so I can drive. I just won't be able to talk much.
Oh, that's good. As long as as long as you're not distracted.
No, no, no. I'm totally fine. And I did. I'm almost on my first module in that group of all the videos. So I've been cruising along in that pretty good.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
So you're enjoying it so far?
Oh,
Recording in progress.
yeah, for sure. It's awesome. I'm enjoying all of it. I actually told Jessica I signed up. I start my NLP practitioner course tomorrow. So I'm pretty excited.
Oh, okay, good. Well, you'll see a lot of overlap between NLP and what we're talking about here because I studied NLP. I'm still studying NLP, but I studied it years ago, so I often use a lot of their modalities and terminology.
Yeah, I'm super excited of starting it. It's something I've had started, like a goal of wanting to do forever. And then talk about it and talk about it, never get around. And it just happened. She came in right after I did your thing last weekend. And then I happened to see her 7 week because I can't do a week straight. I'm too busy with work. So she's doing it over a period of time, which every Sunday's our training day. And then I could just make it work. So I was like, oh, it's meant to be. Now I don't have an excuse as I can't take a week off. So I jumped on it. Me and my fiance did. So she gave us a good deal, and we're both starting tomorrow.
That's good.
Beautiful. If you need a guinea pig, I'm throwing my hat in the ring, baby.
Oh, awesome. I'm excited.
You gotta practice, so you may as well practice on me.
Yeah, I know. That's what I said. And that's a good thing about your fiance. Terry said about having my fiance do it, because then we can practice back and forth and learn. And plus, I've got lots of people in my house. I've got the two kids that are downstairs that are totally interested, and I've got my mother-in-law, which I'm sure I'd like to change lots of things about her. So.
Yeah, I wouldn't tell her that.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to. I'm going to do it all.
Just get in there. Just get in there.
Yes, we're going to redo your thinking because she's all about the poor me. So I'm like, oh, okay, we need to change all that. So
Right.
yeah, but yeah, I'm here. I'm listening.
Awesome.
Great.
So, Anthony, do you want to ask Sherry any questions quickly before she starts driving? So you said that you've done the module. Have you started writing anything on your lists? Have you done any of the meditations, any of that stuff?
Oh, I'm doing the meditations in the morning and at night. I do the guided meditations. I haven't started in my booklet yet, but I'm going to. It's all printed off and it's all in the binder like I was told to do in the videos, and printed it all off thanks to you sending it to me. So I've got it and I look at it, and that's something I'm going to do. I just really got into the videos, and honestly, I put on my headphones, and at nighttime, I listen to the same ones over that I've already listened to, and it just kind of programs it as I'm falling asleep. The other day, my fiance's like, "You were sleeping and you were listening to this," and I got up and was like, yeah, and that's it being embedded in my brain even as I fall asleep, right? So I listen to the same ones that I'm already conscious of listening, and do it when to fall asleep or to listen to, so that I just pound it in my brain.
That's good.
Love it.
Yeah, one of the big secrets, one of the things that I learned years ago from this fellow Paul Meyer that I mentioned earlier, he talked about the magic of spaced repetition, right?
Yes.
And so it really is magic, and a lot of people just don't get it. Like they think, well, okay, I watched the videos once, I understand it, I got it, right? So that's a big mistake, because what we're talking about in this program here is the fact that we can change our brain. And the thing that changes your brain, which they now call neuroplasticity, the thing that changes it is basically repetition.
Repetition. Yes, and that's my biggest mistake, is usually like, oh, I watched it, but then I can actually sit and read a sentence or a paragraph in a book and so distract myself that I'm like, oh, I don't know what they're talking about in the next paragraph, and I think that I'm intaking it, But I'm learning now, like I've got a highlighter when I go through things and I highlight things that mean something to me, because if I go over it and read it and then go, well, that's pretty cool point, and then go back and highlight it, that's twice. I'm reading it again, I'm doing the work, and I'm just finding that I can go through a course and at the end go, oh God, what was that again? So I'm learning that repetition in my brain is going to make me intake it a lot more. So yeah, I keep listening to the same ones over and over until I'm confident that I'm understanding.
Yeah, that's one of the huge secrets, is spaced repetition. And what I've found, and what you'll probably find too, is that over time, the meaning of a lot of those words change. And this is one of the reasons why I suggested last week that we should have a buddy, that we're going through this course with, because when you understand something and you talk to your buddy's liable to say, oh, well, I didn't get that out of it, I got this. And you go, oh, well, I never thought of that. And that's actually one of the big keys to learning and to expanding your horizons and expanding your understanding, is realizing that other people understand things differently than you do. And so that's really powerful. I've had the experience of listening to some of my recordings, which, either a recording of a lecture that I gave, or maybe even a class like this, like a meeting like this one, and I'll listen to it and I'll go, gee, I didn't know I said that. That's really good. I forgot what I said, or I forgot what somebody else said. And so we have this concept in psychology that is called the foreground and the background, right? So certain things are in the background. Like at the moment, I'm looking at my computer screen here. I'm looking at Jessica, and that's in the foreground, right?
Yeah.
But what's in the background is, noises in my room, or the birds that are outside feeding in my bird feeder, like I'm not paying attention to those. But as soon as I put my attention on the bird feeder outside, then that becomes the foreground. So what you find in doing this work is that things which you sort of knew before, all of a sudden now they come jumping into the foreground. They were in the background before, and now they're in the foreground. And as we go through some of these concepts that we're going to be talking about today, and also in future meetings, of course, you'll find that a lot of things jump out to you from the background that you didn't notice before, right? So that's really, really powerful.
I love that concept. And I have found it to be true, like over and over and over again, is when you create like those new awarenesses and you start looking for different things, like they're there, they've been there, they're like right there waiting for you. You just haven't been open to seeing them, and we just miss them, right? And
Exactly.
I'm finding the last 6 months or a year since I've been like diving a lot more into this kind of work and creating new awarenesses for myself, like opportunities and really cool shit is just coming at me. Like I almost have to bat it away because it's just so much and it's all so cool. But I think it's exactly to your point, is I'm open to it now. I'm paying attention. I'm focused on what I want. And it's like, wow, it's blowing my mind like a lot.
Yeah, that's right. So this idea, of changing your brain, that really tends to trigger that, because when you learn a new concept, and we're going to cover a couple of new concepts today, at first, they don't make much sense. Maybe they think, oh, maybe, that's not right. That can't be right, But then when you sort of get it, you think about it, you meditate on it, you repeat it to yourself, and then suddenly you start to kind of be aware of it. You go, oh, hey, there's an example of that, which I didn't realize before. And that happens more and more and more. And then, so that's part of the process of neuroplasticity. And over time, things that you thought were impossible before, perhaps, Now they seem possible and normal and perhaps easy, right? So yeah, so it really is exciting, and it's the kind of thing, what we're engaged in now is this process of consciously changing our reality by changing our thinking and changing our brains. Now, this is a huge topic right now. It's a huge subject, and there's lots of books being written about it, and there's lots of courses and things about it, but it's still relatively new. And most people have never heard of it. Most people don't know anything about it. And this is the thing that I first realized when I started working with Paul Meyer. This was way back, in the late 70s, early 80s, that I was noticing all these new insights, right? And even neuroplasticity. Now, I have books that I have been studying on what they used to call metaphysics, right? Kind of the new psychology from the late 19 or the late 1800s and early 1900s. And they talked about neuroplasticity in there. But they didn't call it neuroplasticity because they didn't have that term, right? Neuroplasticity is a term that only was coined in about 1995 when they had this machine called a functional MRI that allowed people to look inside people's brains as they were thinking, and they started to realize, hey, the brain is actually doing stuff that we didn't realize. And so if you have seen the movie The Secret, which was very popular, 10 or 15 years ago, it's a great movie and it's a great book. It talks about the law of attraction in there. And the one of the main authors that triggered that movie was a guy named Wallace Wattles. Now, Wallace D. Wattles, he wrote a book called The Science of Getting Rich. And he also wrote another book called The Science of Being Great. And so those books, they were one of the key influences on Rhonda Byrne when she engaged in this process of consciously changing her thinking and changing her reality, and that inspired her to make this movie The Secret, right? But if you read those books by Wallace Wattles, and there's other people too, but he's one person that I know. He says right in there, doing these thought exercises, thinking in what he called a certain way. He said you have to think in a certain way, right? And when you think in this certain way, it changes your brain. It causes the neurons in your brain to change and grow. Well, this was in 1890, 1910, 1920. So people thought, well, the guy's a lunatic, right? I mean, this is so ridiculous. I mean, the idea that you could change your brain consciously just by thinking in a certain way, all the scientists, all the doctors considered that to be, like astrology or palm reading or something like that. It was just so ludicrous, right? And that's the way people think about the law of attraction, which they talk about in the movie The Secret. Well, in 1995, using the functional MRI to study people's brains as they were thinking, lo and behold, doctors were shocked to realize, hey, guess what? You can change your brain, Now it's a huge thing, right? Neuroplasticity it seems like it's everywhere. Still, lots of people haven't heard of it. Lots of people don't know how to use it. But certainly a lot of people are thinking about it, and there's lots of books being written and a lot of research being done all over the world. Everything from, curing alcoholism and depression and those kind of things. But also a lot of sort of new age stuff, about achieving your goals and using the law of attraction. So what a lot of people are maybe not aware of, they can read a book called Change Your Mind, I think it's called Train Your Mind, Change Your Brain. And it was written about 2007, I think, and it describes the whole process of the origin of this process of discovering neuroplasticity. And the impetus for that, the person who was largely responsible for that whole research project that discovered neuroplasticity, was the Dalai Lama, because he believed that meditators were changing their brains, and he experienced it. Of course, he comes from a heritage of lifelong meditation as a Tibetan monk, and going back 2,000 years, right? More than 2,000 years. And so he was experiencing this idea of changing your brain. Like, he knew that his brain was changing. And so when he first contacted some of these Western scientists and tried to interest them in doing brain research to see whether or not meditators actually had different kinds of brains, I mean, there were changes in the brain, most of the scientists said, what do you know about medicine? What do you know about, neuroanatomy? You're a Tibetan monk, But eventually, it took around 20 years. But eventually, starting in the mid-70s, he got some Western scientists who were also meditators, and they started studying this, and they discovered, much to their surprise and shock, whoa, doing this, thinking in a certain way, changes your brain. And so now, like I say, it's a big thing. And so this certain way of thinking is what they call controlled attention. So in other words, when you think of something, you focus your attention on it, and you think about it over and over and over and over again, which is what we've all done when we learned the times tables in grade 4, 5, and 6, And if any of our listeners here have learned a foreign language, especially as an adult or in school, where you have to study vocabulary, you have to try and learn how to say these words. Learning a foreign language, that effect of neuroplasticity is because they're focusing on learning that language. And what happens is their brain changes, and then pretty quickly, after a few months or a few weeks, depending on the person, they experience that now somebody can say something in that foreign language, and hey, they understand it now, right? So that's the change that neuroplasticity is like. That's what it feels like. That's the experience of it. And I'm a linguist. I speak several languages. I studied linguistics in university, and linguistics is a field of neuroscience. And so learning Chinese, which is the last language that I learned when I went to China in 2005, that was by far the most difficult thing that I've ever tried to learn, and it was amazing, like, it took a long time. It took months and months and months. But eventually I got to the place where, I could listen to somebody talking and I could understand what they were saying. Whereas in the beginning, it all sounded just like a bunch of mishmash, no intelligent sounds at all. So in some ways, that's the kind of experience that we all have when we start studying these principles of, changing your thinking, changing your reality, changing your thoughts, changing your feelings, which is what we're doing in this program here. So you had a question, Jessica. We talked briefly yesterday, just getting ready for this. And you asked me a question about the past and the future. Do you want to just get into that again, what you were talking about?
Yeah, it wasn't so much a question as much as it was kind of an aha moment, I guess I had. And so it was part of the bonus material, I think, in the program, like the bottom part of the program. And it was something along the lines of when you write your past successes, what that does is it pulls up positive energy from your past. So in my language, it's like data. I talk about like creating data that we can pull from. And then when you write down your goals, you're doing the same thing, but you're now pulling that positive energy, or in my case, I would call it like data from my future to my now, which so what I kind of got from that was it's almost like it creates motivation right here and right now, is because now you're pulling this energy from both sides, and it's like proof. It's like, look, see, you've done it before, you want it again, here you go, this is your motivation. So I guess my question would be like, am I interpreting that correctly? Is that what you meant, or is there even more layers to it that I'm missing?
No, that's exactly right, and that's a great insight. Now, that insight was the thing that got me started in this whole field of, what is reality, what is the mind, what is the brain, how does it work, and it happened because of a dream that I had when I was 10 years old, where I literally kind of knocked myself out. I was playing in a tree, and I fell out of the tree, knocked myself unconscious. And in this state that I was in, I was out of my body. My experience was I was floating above my body as though I was in a helicopter or something. And I was looking down at myself at the age of 32. So this was just kind of a flash of insight, right? In the East, they talk about insight like a flash of lightning on a dark night. And that's exactly what it was for me. So I don't know how long this flash of insight happened, how long it took. It might have been 10 seconds, it might have been 30 seconds, it might have been 1 second. I don't know. But all that I know is that I had this experience of being out of my body, looking down at myself at the age of 32. And so I knew, right? It was a feeling that this was very special. And so I saw that I was going to be writing, I was going to be teaching, I was going to be helping people live better lives, I was going to be a university professor, I was going to be married to an Oriental woman. These are some of the things that just came to me in this flash, right? Well, what that inspired me to do was to do some research into the mind and time and success, because what I saw was that I was going to be teaching people how to be happier and how to be more successful. So I spent 20 years reading all the books I could find on metaphysics and motivation and business and goals and success and personal development and self-development, all those kind of things, trying to figure out how on earth I could get information from my future, because that's what I felt happened to me, right? And I say felt because it was a feeling. It was a feeling of sort of certainty, but I couldn't explain it. I didn't know how it worked or anything else. So for me, the experience that really sort of put it all together was when because I'd been studying success, which is how I got into the work of Paul J. Meyer, and I studied NLP, and I studied meditation and metaphysics. And so I was learning about visualizing and meditation and goal setting and this kind of thing. And so I ended up doing this daily meditation exercise, which I'm still doing, but I mean, I did it because of this course in metaphysics and mind power that I took. And so what I used to do was do this, 20-minute visualization every day, and I would just sit. At the time, I was living in Kitsilano, so I used to go to the beach in Vancouver and sit there and just, close my eyes and just meditate and do whatever I was working on that particular day, right? And so I was in the process of trying to remember my past because in my 20s and mostly around my 20s, but certainly in my mid-teens to my late 20s, I really lost my sense of direction. You know, my life was a real struggle. My relationships were a mess. I had no self-confidence. You know, I was overweight. I was smoking, and I was drinking. You know, and so I was really lost, and I was looking for some direction. And so, doing this meditation exercise, I would close my eyes, and I realized that I didn't have very many feelings that I could feel. I thought, gee, you know, I can feel angry, I can feel frustrated, I can feel like I've been ripped off, I can feel cheated, you know. But in terms of feeling good, I realized, gee, you know, I don't really know how to feel good. I mean, that was a real breakthrough for me to realize, you know, I don't know how to feel good, right? And so I was doing this meditation and I was trying to remember times in the past when I felt good, right? Which now I would call my past successes list. But at the time, I was just trying to find some place in the past where I felt good, right? So I remember going to the beach in Kitsilano, closing my eyes, and, you know, trying to do this visualization exercise and remember positive times in the past. Well, every time I did that, as soon as I thought about the past, immediately I got angry and frustrated and felt ripped off, you know, ripped off by the school system, and, you know, my parents didn't support me, and, you know, I was criticized all the time for being different, you know. And so, but I persisted because you know, I knew the value, I knew the value of repetition, right? So I remember it took me about a week, and I'd go down, I'd do this meditation, trying to remember some positive thing in my past, and I couldn't do it. And I thought, you know, this is ridiculous. I mean, there must be positive times in my past. I mean, every kid, you know, every time you see a kid, you know, 5 years old, they're always laughing and playing and jumping around. So I must have had those experiences too. How come I can't remember any, right? Which is an interesting question. Why can't I remember any? So we'll talk about that maybe later on. But eventually I remembered baseball. Oh yeah, baseball. I used to love baseball. And when I lived in Nova Scotia, when I was like, you know, between the ages of, well, 2 and about 11, I used to play baseball with my friends in the summertime. And so I remembered playing this one baseball game, and I remembered, you know, how much fun it was. So that was the thing that kind of triggered this ability to go back in my mind and then remember a positive experience and feel it in my body in the present, right? And so I did this. I remember I did this for about 6 weeks that I can remember, you know, every day, 20 minutes, close my eyes, go back and remember this baseball game. And I tried to remember my friends' names and different bits of information from this little town that I lived in when I was, you know, 5, 6, 7 years old. And eventually I got to the point where I could remember a lot of my friends' names. I remembered their parents' names. I remembered their dogs' names. I remembered where they lived. I remembered some of their phone numbers, you know, what their parents did for a living. And it was an amazing experience, and it was like cleaning off the dirt from an old painting or something. It seemed like every time I went back in my mind, I could remember more details. And then one day I remembered that after one of these baseball games, I was playing in this tree and I fell out of this tree, and I saw myself at the age of 32 living by the ocean, you know, writing, teaching, helping people live better lives, etc. And it was like, talk about a whack on the side of the head, you know, you've heard that expression. That's what it was like. And my eyes shot open and I suddenly realized, oh my goodness, I just had the same dream that I had when I was 10 years old, but I had it from the other end, you know? So that was really the genesis of this whole process of mine that I eventually ended up writing about in my book, Mind, Time, and Power. And the key insight that I got from that was that memory, which I had always thought and learned was like a recording, right? You know, we have these mental snapshots. I remember meeting you in Vancouver a few years ago. We went to this workshop, you know, and if we think about that now, you know, these images and these sounds and these people that we were in that workshop with, they come back into our mind, right? So I realized memory is not a recording, it's a connection. You know, I'm connected. Here I was 32 years old. And I thought, you know, I'm connected to the 10-year-old. Well, if you think of a connection, like a telephone call or like a Zoom call that we're doing right now, the thing about a connection is information goes both ways. You know, I can see you, you can see me. I can hear you, you can hear me. You ask me a question, I can answer. I ask you a question, you can answer, right? So what I started to realize was thinking memory is a connection. That's why I had this insight when I was 10 years old, because at a certain level I was connected from the age of 10 to the age of 32, which I was now. So I thought, you know, having a memory of age 10 when you're 32, that seems perfectly normal. You know, anybody can do that, right? But the idea that at 10 years old you can have information about when you get older, that didn't make sense. It didn't make sense to me. It didn't make sense, you know, to a lot of people. But when I thought about it being a connection, like a phone call, then I realized, well, that makes perfect sense, right? So that was the first answer that I got when I asked myself at the age of 10, 12, 15, when I was doing this research initially to try and explain this dream of mine. How is it possible to get information from the future? Well, I realized that's how, you know, because now I'm connected, right? There's a connection between my 10-year-old and 32-year-old self. And keep in mind that I had spent 6 weeks building this connection, you know, like it didn't happen all by itself. I had gone down to the beach every day and tried to remember that summer when I was playing baseball, and eventually remembered climbing that tree and falling out and hurting myself and knocking myself out. So I had spent 6 weeks building that connection. So I thought that kind of makes sense now why that 10-year-old would have some unconscious information about when he was in his early 30s, because I just spent 6 weeks going backwards and building that connection, right? So that was the first answer that I got to how does the mind work in the future, right? In the past and the future. Thinking memory is a connection, right? And then that also explained to me why it was so important to have goals, which I learned from Paul Meyer. You have to have goals. Why? Because goals are in the future. And the more you work in the workbook and the more you identify your goals and the more you play around with them and think about them and put them into categories, and, you know, the more clear you become of that future self, and that same kind of connection gets created between your present self that's doing the goal setting and the future you that's experiencing in your life in the future. So that's what I call the mind-time connection, right? That thinking is a connection. Every time you think of the past, every time you think of the future, there's a connection formed. And information from the past or from the future travels between those two places in space-time, right? And just to kind of wrap this up finally, because I know I've been talking a long time about it, getting back to neuroplasticity again, the more you do it, the more the nerves tend to grow, the more connections you make in your brain. And in 1995, when the scientists were using the functional MRI and discovered neuroplasticity, the other thing that they discovered was what they now call mental time travel. Now, most people have never heard of mental time travel. I just did a search for it on Google before this meeting started today. I just went on Google and typed in mental time travel. There were 2.6 billion references came up, right? So there's 2.6 billion places on the internet where people are talking about, mental time travel. So mental time travel, what the scientists discovered in 1995 using the functional MRI was that what we generally call daydreaming and what we call memory are the same. And so they started calling it future memory or mental time travel, and that is the key insight that I wanted to talk about today. That's why when you think about your past successes, you feel good. And it's why when you imagine yourself in the future achieving your goals, you feel good too, because the energy from the past and the energy from the future enters your body in the present, and you can feel it.
Okay, I have a question.
Yep. Go ahead. I know
Okay,
I
so
gave you a lot of information there, but
I took a lot of notes, but there's one in particular that I want to ask. So when you were saying that you were spending those 6 weeks creating that connection, was it the same thought, the same question that you were asking yourself the entire time? Like, is that, do you think, what created that connection? Or was it simply just allowing yourself that time in that space with an intention of remembering things?
yeah, my intention was to remember times in the past that I felt good, because
Okay.
I realized I didn't know how to feel good. I had forgotten or lost the ability to feel good. I'd spent 15 years angry, frustrated, depressed. I dropped out of high school, I dropped out of college. I was so confused and so angry, and yet I had this experience where I was supposed to be a university professor and a teacher and a writer and whatever. And, I couldn't reconcile the two, right? And so I spent about 15 years being angry and frustrated, and I literally forgotten how to feel good. And so that was the purpose of my meditation, was to go back and try and remember times in the past that were enjoyable, and when I remembered them I would feel good. And so the shock for me was when I had the feeling all of a sudden one day, hey, I just had the same dream that I had when I was 10 years old, only I had it from the other end. I had it from now, in my early 30s. So the intention was to develop the ability to feel good using my past memories as a resource. And that's the purpose
Okay.
of the past successes list. That's one of the purposes of the past successes list, is to have, literally, to have ideas, which you can call memories, but to have thoughts that when you think about them, they make you feel good. And so that's the purpose of the past successes list, is to write down some past successes, and they can be, as I said before, they can be big or small. You don't have to be very big. Learning how to boil an egg, when you're helping your mother in the kitchen at 6 years old, that's a good one, right? So the thing is, what you're doing with this exercise is you're trying to remember times in the past that were positive, successful, where there's energy, right? And when you do that and you learn to feel good, you learn to feel successful, you learn to feel happy, what happens is, again, neuroplasticity, your brain starts to develop, the neurochemicals in your brain start to increase, and you find that you start to feel better more of the time, and your feelings and your emotions start to change. And then with that idea of the things moving from the background to the foreground, again, or calling it law of attraction, which is how I understand it, what you suddenly start to notice is, as you start to develop these feeling senses, your inner, using your inner senses to feel good, what you notice is, hey, there's lots of stuff in the present to feel good about that you forgot about. Or when you're feeling good and you go back to your high school experience, which for me was, my memory of high school was that it was a bummer. Um, Suddenly now, because I was able to feel good, I was able to go back in my imagination, remember high school, and remember lots of good times that I had, which I had forgotten about. So that idea of the mental time travel, past successes list, neuroplasticity, you put those three ideas together, and what we're learning to do then is to use the past as a resource to develop our ability to feel positive, to feel excited, to feel motivated, to feel happy in the present. And to me, that's been one of the most powerful things I've ever learned. I mean, it's really life changing. And so I hope that the people that are listening to this and watching this video do that exercise with the past successes list and meditate on it, just simply remembering those past experiences. Um, Realize that what we're doing is we're consciously changing our neurochemicals in our brain and in our body, and we're learning how to put ourselves in a more positive state using that past successes list.
So would you suggest, like, yes, writing the list, but also maybe doing like what you did, is maybe giving yourself, say, okay, I'm going to work on my past successes list today, and actually sitting and meditating on it and just letting it come up that way. And then of course keeping the book open, and then as things come up, because like you say, the more that you pull that into your foreground, of course, the more ideas are going to just start to come randomly. But for somebody who maybe struggles with that, like I have very little memory of my childhood, and so I'm thinking might be a good thing for me to actually make almost an appointment with myself to sit on this and then think about it and give myself 20 minutes to just quietly ask myself that question. And do you think that would be a good way to start?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what I would recommend. Is that you think of one time. I mean, for me, it was playing baseball. And it took me, as I remember, it took me 3 or 4 or 5 days to remember that. Um, but when I did, it was like, oh wow, that's right, I forgot about that. I totally forgot, right? And one of the things that I remember when I was studying psychology in university was the statement that memories are state specific. So, in other words, when you're in an angry state, you can remember all kinds of things that make you angry, right? Which for me was anything to do with school or my parents. And but if you can feel good, if you can feel successful, then you can ride that energy. You can go back in your mind and you can remember things that were successful. And so when I was making my living traveling around doing workshops and trainings and things, I remember lots of times when I taught this exercise to people in my workshops and they would be blown away. And I remember getting an email from one person who did a weekend workshop with me, and he sent me this incredible email a few weeks later saying, I'm a success. I'm a successful person. I didn't realize I had so many successes. I got up this morning successfully, I brushed my teeth successfully, I got dressed successfully, I drove to work, I had a successful experience driving to work, I parked my car successfully, I had a successful day at work, I was successful finding a place to have lunch today, and my whole life has changed because I'm a success. And I thought, whoa, that guy really got it, right? So that's the process, right? You start with thinking, okay, what can I think of in the past that I was successful at? And like I said, it could be learning how to make a boiled egg or something, or make a sandwich, or it could be something big like getting a degree from university, or getting married, or buying a house, or whatever it happens to be for you. But the key is just to search around using your inner senses, right? People think we have 6 senses. Well, we have 12 because we have 5 outer senses and 5 inner senses. So I guess we have 10 senses anyway. So using your inner senses, search out times in the past or events that you would call successful events, and and then using that successful event, feel successful, and when you're in that successful state, you'll be able to remember other times that you were successful. So put those on your past successes list. And after you have a few of those, then, pretty soon, and like I say, the scientists tell us it takes about 30 days to be able to measure the changes in your brain. So if you were to do that exercise on a regular basis every day, by the time 30 days has gone by, you're going to feel much more successful, and you're going to have, you're going to have a longer past successes list than you thought was possible in the beginning. So that's the process. Thinking of a past successful event, feeling successful, trying to remember another one, remembering another one, writing it down, thinking of those past successes. And to me, that's been one of the most powerful things that I've experienced in my entire life.
Awesome. So I have another question, and this is back to about your dream when you were 10. Okay.
Right.
So I've heard your story quite a few times, and I love it. So my question though is, do you think that because you had that dream and you remembered it and you believed that it was going to be your future, that set you on a path to go create that for yourself? Or do you really or is it really more about, you feel like there was that connection because of that time that was coming in your future where you sat and you created that connection? I'm just curious, because what prompted you to do that sitting on the beach was the fact that you were trying to reconcile your reality versus what you had expected. So I'm just curious, your take on that. Do you think that made it so from a goals point of view, do you feel that because you believed that so strongly that was what created your reality, or do you believe it was the opposite, that it was already your destiny and you were just having a glimpse into your future, or both? I don't know.
It was both. Yeah. Part of it was me going after a goal because I saw it in my imagination,
Mm-hmm.
and part of it was things happening to me, which I hadn't necessarily, tried to experience for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then realizing after it happened, oh, hey, that's part of the same goal. Now, the way that I think about it now is, you see, I can remember right now, I'm 75, or I'll be 75 in a couple of months, right? I can remember being 10 years old. I can remember being in high school. I can remember being in my 20s, my 30s, my 40s, my 50s, right? So if you think of those memories, all those connections as being like a strand of rope, right? Well, now my connection to my past has all kinds of different strands to it. But when I was in my 20s and 30s, I didn't have that. When I was in my 20s, certainly by the time I got to be in my early 30s, then I was into meditation and mind power, So the reason I took the mind power course was that I wanted to change my life. And it was in that course that I learned about visualizing and meditating, right? And so one of the ideas that I saw in that dream of mine was that I was going to be a university professor. Well, that's what I thought was my destiny, right? And I was a really bright kid in school and used to be a top student, in grade school and middle school. But my family moved so much that by the time I got to high school, I sort of developed this feeling of being an outsider, right? And I started to get really resentful, and I stopped paying attention to school. And so I ended up not exactly failing out of school, but when I finished high school, I wasn't able to go to university because my marks weren't good enough. And so all through my teens and early 20s, that resentment that I felt about completely blowing my school experience and preventing myself from going on to a higher education, which I thought was my destiny, that was a big source of my frustration and anger and feeling ripped off, because I thought I had really screwed my entire life up. And when I was in my late 30s, 20 years after I failed out of high school or bombed out of high school, 20 years later, I suddenly realized one day that I could still go to university, you know, because as a mature student, they don't care what your marks are. You just pay the tuition, you go in, you know. So I enrolled in university at UBC, and the purpose was to write my book, you know, about the power of the mind, which was my big thing at the time. So I thought, hey, I can go back and I can become a university professor now, right? So, but that didn't happen. Life got in the way. I was in a car accident, you know, was in the hospital for a while, dropped out of my master's program, and again, you know, sort of thought, okay, well, I blew that again, you know, and that was another source of resentment and anger and frustration. But I had the opportunity to go to China when I was, this was in 2005 actually, or 2004. I had the opportunity to go to China. And by a fluke, I mean literally a fluke, I did not expect it by any means, you know, I ended up becoming a university professor through that job in China. And that blew my mind, you know, because I went there with Capilano College as a language teacher. And while I was there, Capilano College became Capilano University, and I was on staff at Capilano College as a teacher in China. So I remember the meeting where the head of the program called a meeting one day and said, I got some good news, you know, Capilano College has just become Capilano University, and all of you staff members who are, you know, staff of Capilano College are now university professors. And I nearly fell out of my chair. So there's an example of something that I had tried to do, worked towards it, wasn't able to do, and it happened kind of by a fluke. And by the way, one other thing was in that dream, 10 years old, I knew that I was going to be married to an Oriental woman. Well, I ended up getting married in China. Totally didn't expect it, you know. I'm happy now that it did happen, of course. But so there's the answer to the question, I hope, you know, is that part of it was intentional. Certainly writing a book, that was intentional, you know, and doing the writing I'm doing, all that I'm doing with intention, and that came out of the idea that I was going to be a writer when I grew up. That was part of that vision. The idea of the Oriental woman becoming my wife, that happened, you know, when I was in my 60s, late 50s, I guess. And so it's really a combination of both. And so one of the ways that I think about this, because it's a great question, you know, because people think either you make your life or your life happens to you, right? Well, it's really a combination of accident and design, right? And the person that I think of when I think about this is Phil Mickelson. Now, Phil Mickelson is a golfer. He's a professional golfer. He's one of the most successful golfers in the world, right? He's won something like close to 50 PGA Tour events. He's won, you know, $40-50 million in his career. He's got 3 majors, I think, three majors. His goal when he was young, 5 or 10 years old, was to be a professional golfer. So there's no doubt that he became a professional golfer largely through intention and goal setting and visualizing and planning and all that sort of stuff. But the goal that he was specifically aiming at was to win the U.S. Open. Well, he's never won it. He's tried. He came second, I think 6 times he came second. He's never won it. So it's like, is he a failure then that he never won the U.S. Open? That was his goal. Well, that's a pretty narrow way to look at it. He's had a successful career, successful life. He's won, you know, more golf tournaments and won more money playing professional golf than most golfers, and yet so far he's still trying. He hasn't won the U.S. Open, which was his goal, right? So you've heard it said probably that what's important about the goal is not so much reaching the goal, it's becoming the person that you become in the pursuit of that goal. And so I think of Phil Mickelson as a perfect example of that. Spending 30, 40 years trying to win the U.S. Open, he's never won it yet, but he's certainly become a super successful golfer and husband and philanthropist and everything else in the process. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it always reminds me when I hear this kind of stuff about the story of Thomas Edison and his mom out of the Think and Grow Rich book, right? Is how, and I don't know if people listening to this, if they're familiar with it, but it's one of my absolute favorites, where Thomas Edison goes to school when he's very young, 5 years old, whatever, and they send him home with a note for his mom, and he can't read, so he has no idea what's on this note, but the note actually says that your son is slow, he's never going to keep up with the class, we don't have the resources to teach him, you can't send him back to school, he's your problem now. But the mom reads the note, and what she tells Edison is the exact opposite, is that you're too advanced for the class, they don't have the resources to work with you, you're special, and so I'm going to have to work with you. And he went on to invent like amazing things, including the light bulb, right? So it's really just a matter of what you believe about yourself, and this identity that you hold is really the key to creating that success for yourself. So that's why I was curious about that, is like, did you believe that at 10 years old that this is what you were going to be, and so therefore that was the experiences that you pulled into your forefront, so that you could create it. So regardless of the answer, like, it doesn't, like, I knew that the answer was going to be both, but I just love to hear the explanation of it, right? Because I think it just brings the point, more into just into our minds, and that both we can create what we want. But I also believe, like you say, that there was this glimpse of a true connection to your actual destiny. And especially when you told the story about Capilano, like, you kind of given up on it, and then it actually ended up happening. So, I mean, that was nothing that you did that created that. You tried and you tried and you tried, and it didn't work, but yet it still happened. So for me, that just solidifies that it's both, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so for me to explain it now, the way I look at it now is I say, well, it's clear that there's a connection. You see, this is the key, is that thinking is a connection, right? Whether you're thinking of the past or thinking of the future, or thinking of a past that may never happen, or remembering a future that may never happen, or remembering a past maybe that didn't happen, because we can do all of those, right? We can imagine things that are possible, as well as things that are impossible, or things that are maybe possible, or more or less possible. So there was a connection between myself as the university professor and the 10-year-old, because I could remember it. Remember I said those strands of that rope, right? So now I mean, I still can't explain everything, how the mind works, obviously. I'm not a scientist, but logically it makes sense to me that when I had that vision of my future when I was 10, that there was that connection between myself at 32. That was the one I noticed the most. But also, getting married to an Oriental woman, an Asian woman, and becoming a university professor. Now, if I hadn't been in that car accident and my life had unfolded a little differently, perhaps, I might have become a professor earlier, because that was my intention. But the fact that it happened by a fluke when I was in China, that really blew my mind, So certainly writing, speaking, being a coach, helping people be more successful and happier and improve their lives, that was a direct result of that dream, of that vision. But little bits and pieces of it, happen by a fluke. And of course, there's lots of things which I've tried to do in my life, the same as everybody, that didn't happen. I either didn't succeed at it, or I tried it, didn't work, or I gave up on it. It was too difficult, whatever. But certainly, a lot of my self-image and a lot of the experiences I've had in my life of traveling and teaching and coaching people and working with people, that I believe was a direct result of that vision I had when I was 10 years old. And as I said earlier on in the conversation, things coming from the background into the foreground, right? Once you start thinking about this mind-time connection, and you realize that your thoughts of the future or your thoughts of the past are all kind of mirror images of each other, you'll start to see more and more examples of people, like my example of Phil Mickelson, who did have powerful thoughts of the future when they were young and aimed towards it. A lot of sports figures do that. You read, the biographies of sports figures, Michael Jordan and, Tiger Woods and various people, they had a powerful vision of the future, which kind of drew them forward. But it happens to us every day of our lives, like I think I used the example last week of, realizing, I don't have any bread, I want to make a sandwich. I don't have any bread. So where can I get some bread? Well, immediately I think about the store, but that's a couple of blocks away. So I can sort of see myself going to the store, buying the bread, and then coming home. So that's what I do. Then when I get home, I can remember being in the store buying the bread. So this idea of, your mind being a time machine and this mind-time connection, I believe it's true for every thought that we have. It's not just some special goals that we have. This is the way the mind works, in my opinion, that every thought you have, like when you're daydreaming, your mind is in the past, it's in the future, it's wandering around, and we get thoughts all the time that we could decide our goals. That's why the workbook starts with dreams, right? Because your dreams, you just make a list of all kinds of anything that you want, right? And after you play around with that master dream list for a while, then you start to see patterns, right? And some of those may become goals if you decide this is important enough for you to work on, that you'll actually decide to work towards it. And that's the thing that distinguishes the difference between a dream and a goal. A dream is just something that you want. Could be anything. But a goal is something that it's a dream that you've decided to experience and you're working towards it.
Yeah, love it. Oh, this was great. Thank you so much for, I'm not sure if Sherry's parked somewhere, if you wanted to ask any questions before we end this. I'm going to wait, give you a minute to see if you want to come on.
She left a message I
I'm
noticed
good.
in the chat. Oh, there she is.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm still driving, so if I have any questions, I'll put it in the chat.
Perfect. Okay, good. Awesome.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, Sherry.
Bye. Okay, well, thanks so much again, Anthony. I love this. I love the idea of this because it's so great to be able to ask you questions specifically, right? So that I can get a deeper understanding, and then hopefully people are listening even months down the road when we build this community and people get to come back and listen to these videos. Hopefully some of the questions that I ask and the deeper dives that we take are some of the questions that help other people also to really grab onto this program and see the possibilities that are here for us, right? And I love that you started off talking about, what did you call it? Basically just that it takes a while. The magic of spaced repetition, right? Because I think too often we do that. We're like, okay, yeah, I read that book, or okay, yeah, I took that course, right? And then you're like, well, I don't know if it really did anything or whatever. Well, no, because you didn't actually give it the time and the effort and work on it the way that you were supposed to. So I love that, when you came to me with this idea of building this community to actually do the like deeper dive and give people the opportunity to see it's not a one and done kind of thing. Like this is something that if you want the results, then you have to do it repetitively. And so yeah, I love that that this is what this is. And I mean for me too, like I'm still kind of blown away the fact that I was literally listening to your audiobook, talking to myself, saying 2022 is going to be the year that I really focus more on this, you know, mind power that I believe that I have. But I know that it takes work. I know that it's not a one and done. I know that I have to put in the effort. I have to work on the visualizations. I have to do the meditations. I have to do the journaling. I have to focus my attention. And literally, you messaged me while I'm in the middle of reading your book, which deals with this exactly, and asked if
It's
I
magic.
wanted to build this community.
It's magic. Well, that's good.
This is the magic.
No, this is perfect for
Yeah.
me too because I've been into this material for so long that sometimes I forget what it's like in the beginning, and so it's extremely valuable for me to be talking as we're doing in these calls to find out what is it that you're thinking about it and what is catching your attention or what is causing you confusion, right? So yeah, the my purpose for most of my adult life has been to help people improve their lives by learning some simple tools, mental tools, and so that's what I'm doing. And what I find mostly is because of the way we think about what the mind is, like most people don't think of the mind as a time machine, which is now the latest discovery that they're saying, and the scientists are still struggling with it too. They don't know what it means. I feel like I have a certain handle on it because I've been aware of it for, the last 40 years, right? But the mistake that most people make is they think that the answer that they're looking for is information. And it's not information. It's transformation. In other words, changing your thinking and experiencing the change that happens when you change your thinking. So the mistake that most people make, and this is, more than 95% of people who either read a book like my book or take a workshop like I used to teach, and they're looking for new information, new ideas. And it's very common to have people say, well, I've heard all this before, Well, yeah, you've heard it before, but have you sat down with a binder and written down your thoughts and done it for every day for a year to see what happens? Well, no, I haven't. So this idea of a process and this binder, is the key to it, of simply starting to mine your thoughts. Think of your thoughts, organize your thoughts, and do it repeatedly. That's where the magic comes in. So that repetition is really key.
Well, I'm excited about it. So I already feel like I already know that this is going, and I mean, it really helps me because you and I are doing this together, that I have an even more vested interest in making sure that I'm developing these habits, right? It's so I thank you for that, because it's like my answer to the universe. It's not just, oh, here, I'll give you this free course, or which wasn't free. I paid for it years ago. Obviously, I was interested in this, right? But it's like here, like it's not the universe just gives you a thing. The universe gives you opportunities, right? And I feel like that's what's happened. Is it like when I put out that goal that I wanted to learn this, my friend didn't just walk up and hand me a book and go, there you go, learn it. Like my friend approached me and said, do you want to do this with me? Let's build this thing together. So it's almost like it forced my hand. It's like, okay, you said you wanted it. Here you go. Deal with it. It's on you now, right? So no, I love it. I love it. I'm so excited. And it's currently 11:11, and I love that even more. And
we're just getting started. This is call number 2, right? So so we have a lot of more things, but certainly we've hit some real essential pieces, I think, in this first couple of calls. The idea of the workbook and doing the daily, visualizations, making the lists of past successes. And, we'll get more into this past successes list over the next few sessions as we go, because there's a lot of different
Mhm.
layers to it. But certainly just to recognize that it's a way of learning how to feel better. I think that's a big incentive for me, certainly when I started it,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
it's been a motivation for a lot of people, just learning how to feel good using that
Mhm.
past successes list.
So
Okay,
okay, well I should go
fantastic.
'cause I'm meeting a friend for lunch, so I will see. I'm sure I'll talk to you in the next week, but if
Well, let's
not, I'll
make a
see you
point.
next
Let's make a point of touching
Okay,
base sometime during the week.
sure.
Okay, thanks,
Okay,
Jessica.
okay,
Have a good
okay.
lunch.
Bye.
Okay, ciao.